Basically, we're going to replicate the debate that is happening in so many companies right now, inside these companies, including both of these companies that are represented on the stage are having this debate right now. And our debaters have agreed to essentially represent a caricature of a side of that debate. So don't hold them to anything that they say on stage. In real life. They're for our benefit, playing out the different facets of these sides so that we can see that in reality these are both reasonable points of view and that there are trade-offs and priorities between each. This is in the spirit of debate as a style, which you'll hear a bit about from our moderator, from Ranu as well. So I will very quickly introduce our contestants. Representing the affirmative, Caitlin Conscious. Yeah. The VP of Go-to-Market Strategy for Satellogic, and with a wealth of geospatial product development experience behind her as well. And representing the negative, the opposition, Joe Morrison. The VP of Consumer Products for Umbra Space. Also with a wealth of experience of sorts behind him as well. So these are both great people who are very thoughtful on this, who are exactly the right people to have exactly this debate. And we are I'm very honored to have as our moderator, Kesarano Baylor, who is here from the Eleanor Roosevelt School of Tech and Eleanor Roosevelt's School in Greenbelt. The Tech Magnet High School in Greenbelt, where he is on the debate team. He is also an intern at NASA Goddard and has spent plenty of time wrangling Landsat data in Google Earth Engine, so he knows exactly what he's talking about here. So, yeah. So with that, I will turn it over to Ranu to explain what's going to be going on here today.
All right, mic check. All right, cool. So, good afternoon. My name is Kesarano Baylor. As Ian said, I'm a debater I go to Eleanor Roosevelt High School, and I'm a debater in the Washington Urban Debate League. And so today I'm going to be moderating something that we may not think about all the time, or maybe you all do, but the people back at home may not. We're going to be talking about satellite usage. So we use the satellites all the time, right? I'm sure it's safe to say most of us have gotten lost trying to get somewhere. That GPS that we use, it's a satellite. Our mobile data, that's also using a satellite. I'm sure that's all old news, though. But companies use satellite to figure out things like when they should advertise based on the demographics, what roads should be renovated first based on how frequently they're used, when should they plant a new crop to keep the soil healthy, or how much greenhouse gases are in the atmosphere. Satellites collect a plethora of data by emitting different wavelengths, such as short infrared, near infrared, mid infrared, a lot more infrareds, and regular old light. We use these to calculate properties like vegetation indexes, NDVI, and land surface temperatures and emissivity. Programs like Google Earth Engine allow this information to be accessible to the public. And as Ian also said, I was able to work in Google Earth Engine at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, where I was looking at different types of land cover and trying to look at the accuracy of the Landsat satellite. But is this a good thing or a bad thing, right? Today, we'll be exploring the accessibility of said data and whether there exists a sizable direct-to-consumer market for satellite data. A small satellite data could mean that satellite companies that are already big would dominate. In a big satellite market, there would most likely be a lot of smaller satellite, but in a big satellite market, there would most likely be a lot more smaller satellite companies who could focus on finding more specific data. However, with that many satellites, it could create a security risk on how many companies have access to imagery of the world, which includes our military and our navies. And then there's a bigger risk that the satellites could get damaged by space junk. There is a lot of space junk out there with old satellites that we don't use anymore. So, and also there's a greater potential cyber attack to steal the data of the satellites, but that's regardless of the size of the market. All right, I hope I've reeled y'all in for this debate. I know we were all kind of excited to see Joe versus Caitlin. So I'll kind of give the format of the debate. So each person is going to have a 7-minute speech, and that's going to be the constructive speeches. And then they're going to have, I believe, 3 minutes to ask each other questions. And then we actually have a special segment. We're going to ask the audience, y'all, to ask questions to them as well. So we're really looking forward to that, and I hope you enjoy. So Caitlin, are you going to take it away?
Okay, I think I have slides coming up, but I am here to, they're up, cool. I am here to argue that there is unquestionably a market for consumer satellite data. So I have three pieces to my argument, so I'll summarize them now and go into each in more depth. But first, there's historical precedent for what's happening in the satellite industry today with other foundational technologies that we've seen in the past. There's also, number two, inherent value in satellite imagery that the public has already acknowledged in our everyday lives. And then number three, quite simply, I've sold satellite data to individuals, which suggests that if somebody can put in a personal credit card number or email it to me and they will buy satellite imagery, then the market exists. So I will go into each of these in more detail. So first, on the next slide, there is a historical precedent for what we're seeing in the satellite industry. So other foundational technologies like GPS or the internet were incubated, ARPA-funded initiatives incubated in the government. So we see these technologies start in government, trickle into commercial enterprise, and now are an ubiquitous part of our lives. So for GPS, for example, I woke up and my dog has GPS on his collar, and I could check from Washington, D.C. what his walk looked like in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I went on a run earlier and my watch has GPS and I could track my mileage. I navigated here using GPS and internet on my phone to this session. So it's everywhere. And I assert that satellite imagery will be the same way. When I first started in this field, I'm aging myself, I took a remote sensing class from this lovely lady here, and NASA Landsat imagery was not free. It's only in the last 15 years that NASA data that they've released their archive, and we are now used to looking at satellite imagery on the 6 o'clock news, on the front page of the New York Times. It's everywhere, and it will just become more broadly adopted into our public consumer lives. And then that brings me to my second point, which is it is clearly demonstrated value to us. There's so we can go to the next slide. There is a hurricane, heading directly to Florida. Everybody will anticipate seeing before and after satellite imagery after that hurricane hits. I think the most basic way that satellite imagery is demonstrated value is everybody I know who uses Google Maps on their phone immediately switches from the vector-based view to a satellite view. And that's a very, simple change that the user has to do, but it is a conscious decision that the user makes when interacting with this product to switch to a satellite-based view. And imagine, these base maps are, depending on where you are, 6 months old, 3 years old. Imagine if you could say, I want to see satellite imagery from this morning or last week. Everybody would choose that. It's not even a question. So there's power in satellite imagery. People find it valuable. And then to my third point on the next slide, they're seeking it out. Consumers want to buy satellite imagery. This is an image I sold while at Satellogic to an individual who is very interested in Western Iceland. And I don't know why, but he gave me his credit card number. He wanted these coordinates tasked. We delivered the image. We've had folks who want to look at an address in Ukraine. We don't charge for that. We're not monsters. But we have looked at the imagery and delivered it to individual consumers who are interested in that data. Similarly, we had an investigator who was looking at an oil platform in northern Namibia. We tasked imagery for a week. We delivered it. They successfully could prove that construction started prior to the proper permits being acquired for this project. So people want data. It's very obvious. And I think, on the next slide, the question is not whether this market exists. It definitely exists. It's how are we going to serve the market and how are we going to address the needs of not just the government and commercial enterprises, but everyday consumers who want to buy satellite imagery and use it in their daily lives. And so at Satellogic, we're doing that by lowering the price point of imagery, having a lot of capacity, having no minimum limit on orders. So if you want to send me an email and order a satellite image from us, I will personally guarantee that that occurs. And so we need to lower the barrier to entry for anybody who wants data. So the market is there. How do we address it? Joe.
For you. I think I can ask like one question.
I forgot. Yes, you can.
And then I get my 7 minutes.
That's right.
You mentioned something interesting there. You said we're not monsters, referring to delivering, like charging people money for, I think it was data over Ukraine, was it?
It was somebody concerned about their loved one. So in that specific instance, we did not. Yeah.
So my question for you, this isn't like trying to prove you wrong or anything. I'm just genuinely curious. How do you, for consumer markets, so much of the demand for tasked satellite imagery is existential. It's a place that's flooding. It's a conflict zone. Yep. It's like, I just need some information, any information. Can you give it to me? How do you square that with a business model where you charge people money? Because you are delivering something valuable and it does cost money to produce that data. What does that look like in those circumstances? Because you can't always be giving it away.
Right. Yeah. And I think in order to serve the market, it has to be a more automated way to task and deliver imagery. And so you can't vet every use case. I think the model is to, potentially have different pricing structures for different users. There's lots of public goods that do cost money that you can't give away. So I think it's just being thoughtful about how you charge those users and have different delivery mechanisms for addressing different user needs.
Cool. Oh, really? I can ask more questions? Oh, sweet. Okay, I got more questions.
All right. I got more answers, Joe.
What is a consumer use case for satellite imagery? And I guess more broadly, what proportion of your business is consumer applications for satellite imagery?
Yeah, I'll start with the second question. I mean, right now, I think we're starting to see this market emerge where people realize they can order data. This is a new thing. So right now, it's a small percentage of our total revenue at Satellogic. We anticipate that growing in future years, and we're building, APIs and platforms to address that market. I think a really, one use case that might seem silly is, as we see more natural disasters and events, my parents were in one of the many terrible California wildfires, but that hit Ventura in 2018. And they for sure would have tasked imagery to see where that fire was in, if they could task it to get that information the following morning, they would have done that. I think there's going to be more precedent for legal cases to be using satellite data. I think we live in a society where people don't want to be told something, they want to be shown something, and a satellite image is objective proof that something's happening, as we saw on that oil and gas platform in Namibia.
Nice. So is the floor over to me now? How does this work?
Yeah.
Okay.
My mic? Yeah. So thank you for the cross-ex. So now we're going to move on. Now we're going to move on to Joe's speech, which is going to be 7 minutes as well. Or you have 7 minutes to talk, but if you want to finish early, that's fine.
Yeah, I'm currently questioning the decisions that brought me here. When Ian first proposed this idea of a debate, I thought he was joking and we were playing along with each other. And I was like, yeah, it's a great idea, a debate. You could do like 2 podiums, And then when I realized he was serious about it, I had some people to suggest who would do a debate because I definitely didn't want to do it. So I thought, I'll help you recruit the people. And then when person after person, no one was able to do the debate, I thought, that's too bad. He's not going to be able to do his fun idea. Until he sent me an email a few weeks ago and he said, we need someone for you to debate. Like, you're the only one. And I'm like, me? I'm the guy that has to get stuck? And so, like an idiot, I was like, well, like the smartest, most charismatic, most experienced person I know is Caitlin. So here I am debating against someone that I'm literally rooting for in this debate.
There are we all.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, let me present my case that there actually is no consumer market for satellite imagery. And I'm going to do that by basically changing the subject entirely. So obviously, Caitlin, you said it yourself. You sold satellite imagery to consumers who paid with a credit card. So someone paid money, and therefore there's a market. But what I'm going to argue is that it's actually such a vanishingly small percentage of the future of the industry that it's not worth paying attention to. Although the applications that you build, the way that you build, the way that you distribute the data looks to be consumer friendly, the actual market for satellite data is not a consumer market. We are right now moving from an era of mapping to monitoring. If you were here this morning and you saw Chris Chomes, he basically gave the presentation that I would have given if I was clever enough to have put it together. So instead, I just have the word mapping to monitoring. And what that looks like is, if you go to the next slide, right now I can go on Google Earth and I can find 10 centimeter, 5 centimeter aerial imagery of this location right now. And that's totally free. And it's super well geo-rectified, and the buildings don't move around too much. And so if I have a mapping use case as a consumer, which oftentimes I find consumers just want one little snapshot in time, it's like a very specific one-off event. It's not a high volume of data that they're working with because they're just one human with two sets of eyeballs, or one set of eyeball in some cases, or no sets of eyeballs in some cases. They can kind of get 90% of what they need from free data that already exists online. If we continue forward on the slideshow, how about when I want to move the slides, I'm just going to do that. I'm going to do that motion. My sort of like dumb, provocative way of putting this is that if you can't code, which I can't code, so don't worry if you're in that bucket, the future of the satellite imagery industry doesn't look a whole lot like you. And that is because the volume of data that Satellogic is producing, that Umbra is producing, and will continue growing over time, is so inhuman. Like you could take, I remember with Planet at one point, they're like, if the population in New York spent a second on every image, we still wouldn't be able to put human eyeballs on everything we're producing every day. Like those types of statistics are nuts. And so it's either, if it's a consumer use case, like people looking at a specific spot at a specific point in time, 99.999% of the data that we produce is going to go unused. And that would be a tremendous waste. So it's not even worth focusing on for me. What's worth focusing on is how do we make use of all of the data that we're collecting? And that's fundamentally not a consumer use case. So what does that mean going from mapping to monitoring? It's just exactly what Chom said this morning. It's going from desktop GIS software and tracing lines to looking at spreadsheets of derived signals that you're then combining with a bunch of usually non-spatial data. Sometimes it's spatial data. It's almost never other satellite imagery, but it gets very complicated very quickly. People always think of these like signals that you pull out of satellite imagery as the product or the end. This is a great example from URSA, which tracks global crude oil inventories by looking at the height of floating lids on tanks. As they move up and down, they create a double bounce signal in synthetic aperture radar, and you can kind of estimate the height. They also cast a shadow if you can use optical to do this. That is not the end. That is the very, very beginning of a product. It's like, we're like 10% of the way there. If we go forward, once you have that time series, you've got that spreadsheet. Well, you haven't solved a problem. Like, who cares about crude oil inventory? What do we do with that information? Well, you combine it with a bunch of other information, and those products oftentimes don't look anything like a map. And again, we're so far at this point from going to a website and ordering a satellite image. We're like, that is like basically the first building block, but all the real value to be extracted from this data is downstream of that, way downstream of that. The analogy I like to use is that satellite imagery is like salt, and great valuable satellite imagery products are like pizza. You don't like bite into a slice of great pizza and go like, damn, that is some good salt. Like the art is not the raw data. All right, I got 1 minute left, so I'm gonna go quickly here. The best products, in my opinion, and what the future of the satellite imagery looks like, and part of the reason that this isn't a consumer market, is that you take that trend, that signal, you combine it with a bunch of other data sets that aren't from satellite imagery, You can come up with a model, you can back test that model, and where does that lead you? It leads you to forecasting. There was a great talk this morning, the dam monitoring project, where they're forecasting when floods will happen and giving people a 2 to 4 day. That's where the entire industry in every vertical, every application is going. It is exactly the same thing as the weather app on your phone, predicting whether or not it's going to rain tomorrow. You're not going onto NOAA's website and downloading passive microwave data every morning to try to run your estimate of whether or not it's going to be cloudy today. You're just trusting someone's product that wraps that up for you. I think that's what the future of the industry looks like. A great example of this is Upstream Tech, which builds a hydro forecast product. You should check it out. I got like 10 seconds left, so I'm going to keep going really quickly here. The point is that it's really, really hard to actually produce something valuable from satellite imagery. Really, really hard. Like, not something I would wish upon the average consumer, certainly. And I'm somewhat biased because I work in synthetic aperture radar, which, like, grandma's never going to buy a synthetic aperture radar image and frame it and send it to her grandson, like, on the day of his marriage or whatever. And in my opinion, actually, even though I think it's going to be a massive market, I actually think it's going to be a small community, which is why this room is so exciting, because in my mind, it's only 1,000 companies at maturity that really push 80% of the value of satellite imagery. I'm getting the X, so I gotta cut off. But they might serve, last slide, millions of, well, I guess there's no last slide, millions of users downstream of them. So that's it for me.
All right. So I think we had some really good debates, really good arguments over here on both sides. Right. So we're going to start the second cross-seg segment where you get to ask questions to Joe.
You sure you want to do that?
Is this on? Yeah. So Joe, if I'm understanding your argument correctly, it's not that there's no market, but the majority of the market, or the market worth addressing, are folks who are going to run like large scale machine learning models, or do data mining on large time stacks of data.
Yeah, and that's why I'm kind of surprised about your argument. And I mean, I think you have a genuine belief that there will be a significant number of true consumers that log onto the website, order stuff that's relevant to their particular life. And the reason I'm surprised is, like, you have a PhD in geography with a remote sensing specialty. Like, you worked at Descartes and did some of the most impressive analysis ever done on satellite imagery and turned it into products. And you have like firsthand experience, way more than me, about how hard it is to actually turn that into like lots of value. So I'm not saying that, I don't think I could argue honestly that there's no market for it. And I think there's some serendipity in that the types of products you build so that a consumer can just go online and grow the B2B market as well. It makes it easier for startups to go and get started. And maybe those individuals that like go and buy one image become the Trojan horse into their company or their research institution or their nonprofit that sort of lead them to start trying to build products on top of satellite imagery. But even then, I don't think that lay people will ever significantly rely on satellite imagery. I think they'll hire one of the 1,000 firms who really focuses on it full time in their vertical to solve the problem for them.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I don't think we disagree on, the government will always be a large purchaser of satellite imagery. B2B will always be a large purchaser of satellite imagery. But I do think there are more, holistic ways of looking at satellite data and used for storytelling or getting insights where it isn't somebody that necessarily needs to know how to code, for example. I think there are alternative use cases, but I don't think we're actually wildly divergent on that. Perhaps.
Yeah, that's what I was worried about. Is it fair to open it up to audience questions? I know Caitlin and I talked before this. This room is an incredible group of people. You probably have interesting commentary questions. We kind of wanted to get into that sooner rather than later. So Caitlin, if you're okay with that, and if you're okay with that. So yeah, there's some rules though, I think.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so what we wanted to do was the people who agreed more of Caitlin's argument, we're going to sit on that side, and the people who agreed more with Joe's argument sit on that side. And please don't all sit on Caitlin's side.
It's not sitting. It's which mic you go ask your question to, right?
Okay. Well,
so yeah, if you go ask your question from over there, yeah.
Okay. Well,
Nice. Subit, where are you going?
close enough.
Just gonna watch the room migrate over here.
I'm gonna lose some friends over this.
All right. So I guess we'll start with the right over here. So if you could say your name and ask your question.
Sure. My name is Bill Morris, and my question is there any intrinsic aesthetic value to satellite-derived data, not just imagery, not just optical imagery, or is it just analytical?
VT Craig, what's up, man?
What's up? Nice to see you.
Caitlin, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly there's anybody who's looked at satellite imagery, the slides I was showing, I think they're objectively beautiful. Our Earth is beautiful. It's imagery of our planet. I had a coworker who moved to Argentina and didn't want to buy art, so she printed out a bunch of our satellite images and blew them up and put them on her wall. So, you know, it's yet another consumer market for satellite data, perhaps, is the art world.
I had a funny conversation with Sean Gorman, who's here at the event, and another guy, Jonathan Finsky, on Twitter, where Jonathan, or maybe Sean was quoting Jonathan, but the picture frame market is a bigger market in the United States than the satellite imagery market is. So it should continue outpacing the satellite imagery market should people order things and put them in frames. So I work for a synthetic aperture radar company, and it's very easy to lose perspective looking at synthetic aperture radar detected products all day. And I found a really particularly, I thought, beautiful SAR image. It was a mine site. It had this really cool layover because of the direction it was imaged from. And I made the mistake of showing my mom. And I said, "Mom, check this image out." And she went, "Oh no." And I was like, "What?" She was like, "What? Did something go wrong?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, right. You don't look at synthetic aperture radar all day. You think this looks terrible." So yeah, there is definitely some aesthetic beauty and value there. I think, like most of satellite imagery, it's not monetizable. And so it is a public benefit. It is a social good. And in my weird, you could call it like socialist view of this industry, the highest and best use of all of our time would be to give it all away, because it's just information about what's happening on the world and how that's changing. And really everyone, I think, should have a right to that information. But practically, we can't give it away, at least not yet. But yeah, just because something has a lot of value doesn't mean that you can charge for it easily. And that's when I say there's no consumer market, I'm talking about taking money out of people's pockets, not providing benefit to their lives. Uh-oh.
All right, and on the left.
I know what you say. I want to help you. So, hello everyone. My name is Bruno Sanchez, and as Ian was saying, this is more a caricature of a position than an actual position. I have the high respect for those positions. I'm actually a shareholder in Satellogic, so I love the company. So I think there should not be there's no market because there shouldn't be a market. And I want to argue why very quickly. A market is an asymmetry of information. A market is saying, hey, I want something to give to you because you have money, but not to you because you don't. It's not democratizing satellite images, it's creating inequality. It's saying those who have can have it and those who don't do not. What I think should be is more up the value chain. You don't have a market for GPS. You don't have a market for water. You don't have a market for healthcare in most countries because it's a bad idea, right? It should be a public utility. It also avoids the problem of having so much junk in space that is creating a lot of problems. There is no market for EO because it's artificially pumped by overhyped promises to VCs that are going to make a 100x return when in most cases you can do the same thing or 80% of that with open data. It should not be a market for EO. It should be a public utility.
Trying to figure out how I can disagree with you without immediately contradicting what I just said. Do you mind if I take this one first and then hand it over to you? So even though I agree in spirit, like data about what's happening on the earth really should be free and open. And I really believe that. Like all information wants to be free. That's not an original insight. And eventually it gets free, like over a long enough time period. The reality is that I'm actually happy about the fact that we live in a country that allows for entrepreneurship and innovation to happen and rewards people who take risk and build companies that bring value to people. And I don't begrudge, biotech companies for selling vaccines. I don't begrudge satellite companies for charging for satellite imagery. It is a struggle, I would say, ethically, that we all face as providers, who we sell to and what they do with that data and how to understand intent and how to stop harm when we realize that we're causing it, and how to be charitable without creating a system where people rely on our largesse instead of a sustainable model of accessing our data. It's not an easy answer, but I would say even though, yeah, in an ideal world, I guess maybe everything would be free. But I'm not ashamed of the fact that we charge for our data. I'm actually proud of it.
That totally contradicted what you just said, but.
Dang it.
Yeah, Bruno, I don't disagree either. I mean, I think anything coming out of European Space Agency, which is a huge resource, NASA, it is a public good, and it's funded by taxpayer dollars. It makes sense. I, based on previous lives I've led, know all about overhyped products to VCs. But I think I agree with Joe. I'm proud we charge for our data. I think we need to have different price points and have flexible user license agreements to make sure that it can be disseminated and that products can be shared. But I think there is a public good, and some of it, some satellite imagery is a public good, and then there's some where it's a business and you charge for it for different use cases.
Can I just say before we go to our next question, I didn't realize you were an intern at Goddard.
Yeah.
That's pretty sick.
Thank you.
I think I'm the least qualified person on the stage. And you're in high school.
Well, when everybody's done, I actually did have a question for both of y'all, but you want me to go? All right. So something that you had said, Joe, about how like the market for buying satellite data to the regular consumer, right? The average consumer is low. However, do you consider like the government who is buying the satellite data or other companies who are buying the satellite data, do you consider those consumers? Because in that case, right, because all that data is getting bought. So wouldn't that mean like there is a significant market?
Yeah, Caitlin and I discussed this a little bit before the event. One of the conceits here is that we have different definitions of consumer. And so my definition of consumer is an unaffiliated individual who doesn't need anyone's permission to buy the data. If you're asking someone for permission, you're not a consumer. You're a company, an organization, a government. And so the market for people that just like wake up one day and go on a website and buy an image is in my opinion, small. However, it is a gateway to organizations buying, because individuals bring that knowledge with them to their job and think, oh, we could apply this to all sorts of problems. So it's a great gateway to growing the industry, but the absolute dollar value compared to what organizations buy, I think will be small. But I think, Caitlin, you can disagree about that definition of consumer, because I could imagine small pockets of people, falling into that category of consumer, like I think law firm is one example that you gave.
Yeah, I don't totally disagree with that definition of consumer, but yeah, I think it's the difference between a business or, a group of lawyers could be a consumer. But yeah, I think generally speaking, I agree with you. It's somebody who can log into a website, put in a credit card, get an image, and I think that market exists.
Okay, thank you. And I guess that was a question more towards Joe, but I do have a question more towards you, Caitlin. So this is more kind of like, should we even have a market? Should this data be accessible to, should some satellite data be accessible to the average consumer? Because I know when you were talking about the GPS, right? You're able to track your dog, you're able to track where you go, and we're able to look at where other people are. But that, of course, leaves us with a cyber security threat. So my question is, like, what do you scale that risk of someone stealing it? And like, do you think, based on that scale, do you think a consumer should still be like, do you think there should still be a market for a consumer to get that satellite data?
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack with that question. Yeah, satellite data provides transparency into our world, for better or worse. And so I think you don't want that falling into the hands of bad actors. It's hard to avoid that if data is free and open. That being said, folks can access public data archives from NASA and ESA, and at 10-meter resolution, you can see a lot. But I do think, a certain amount of it should be a public good. I think, as Joe just said, information wants to be free, and we should provide, maybe archive data from a certain point back in time available for free to the public, and then still, ensure that there is a market for new data and tasking going forward.
I was, my brain's like pretty poisoned from working in this industry for a few years. And I was watching this documentary with my wife the other night about the bling ring. You guys know that? Like the teenagers that would break into Hollywood celebrities' stores. And we're watching this, I'm like playing chess on my phone. And then the person on the TV, the ringleader of this like criminal gang of affluent teens said, Google Earth was invaluable for planning every heist. They would use Google Earth. They would look at the terrain of these mansions. They would look at all the entrances and exits. Sometimes they'd have multiple angles with like oblique imagery. And I thought that was pretty cool.
It's another consumer market for high resolution satellite.
So yeah, that's the kind of people that you're supporting is all I'm saying. Just food for thought.
Well, thank y'all for answering my questions. I guess now we'll move on to your left, my right. So,
I'm Caitlin Howarth. I'm affiliated with the Humanitarian Research Lab at Yale and working on the Conflict Observatory. The question I've got is, well, first of all, just want to pose that possibly if there are disproportionate harms being caused by certain commercial products like AirTags being used for stalking, for example, maybe we should also have disproportionate levels of additional protections for those victims. But my real question is, as somebody who is usually on the end asking for all the freebies, I'm really curious to know from the superior Caitlin in the room, what is the price point that we need to be able to get to so that humanitarian and human rights organizations, including really small organizations, can increasingly gain access to these resources without having to be essentially beholden to governments to make those resources free, because that can always be turned off, sometimes very suddenly. What's it going to take for us to get to that kind of price point?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what price point is needed, I would defer to you and other folks who would be actually purchasing the data. I think we're seeing transition in the industry where prices are getting driven down by new space technologies, and whereas data used to cost, $50 per square kilometer to task a scene, we do it for way less. I will try not to make this into an entire sales pitch. But then also, I think having that flexible licensing, like I mentioned, so that it's can then be disseminated across other groups. So if you have some sort of Creative Commons licensing, and then it can be shared across industries, or not industries, other associated groups who are humanitarian organizations, so that you're not reselling that imagery to the same groups who are trying to solve the same problem.
Yeah, I would say step one is acknowledging that we have a problem. So that's the problem is, how much does your satellite imagery cost? And the answer is how much money you got. And then you kind of do that dance. Step one to me is just clear, transparent pricing. And it might be too expensive, but at least you can say that. That's too expensive. You don't have to do this whole like rigmarole. I think synthetic aperture has an advantage just in terms of physics of being able to capture high resolution data without a lot of glass and a big physical aperture. So I think you can see the unit economics of SAR come down. We've got two companies represented on the stage that are both very committed to dropping the price of their respective phenomenologies. And it is because of exactly what you said. Having to rely on someone's charity is not a sustainable way to run an organization. And I mean, Satellogic, to your credit, you manufacture your satellites in Uruguay now, is it?
We design and manufacture satellites in Uruguay, and then we'll open a Netherlands facility thanks to the plug.
Yeah. I mean, you're not making, that's a difficult decision to set up a giant warehouse for high throughput manufacturing in a remote area compared to a lot of like the national assets are manufactured in California, which is a much more expensive place than Uruguay. So you have to do non-traditional things to drop the price. And we both have competitors who are very vocal about how that's a mistake, that dropping the price will not grow the size of the industry, which flies in the face of like every economic example ever. The markets never shrink when you make it easier and cheaper to do things. So I think we're on the same page there. But I mean, from talking to people commercially for monitoring, it's like tens of dollars an observation is what you have to get to in order to make most truly commercial opportunities work. And you need at least a weekly cadence. And that's 2 orders of magnitude less than where we are today. So we got a ways to go.
All right. So I'm looking at the time. It's getting that time where we got to wrap things up. But if y'all do have any additional questions, of course, I'm sure Caitlin and Joe will be able to talk to y'all like individually. So
I actually have to go catch a flight, so you all can send me emails.
All right, that works too. But I'm really glad we had this conversation because like as a NASA intern working on Google Earth Engine, I'm able to get Landsat data or MODIS data, and like use that to look at like high resolution pictures, look at calculations of land surface temperature. And I don't really think much of it, and now I'm hearing this debate like, okay, wow, so there's a market that's going on, and so this is really fun experience.
I look forward to voting for you someday.
Well, I also want to thank Ian for actually inviting me as well, and I want to thank the Boulder coordinator, David Trudeau, for also inviting me as well. So get that. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Ron, and thanks so much, Joe. Thanks, Caitlin. That was really fun. I really enjoyed it. Everybody else, the reception already started like 10 minutes ago. You guys are missing it. So head on over and